Now, we have done very well, I think, in our first two sessions, and Eli the Everyman, is going to introduce, I think I'm right in saying, it's certainly in generic terms, something that has been lacking in humanity for quite a number of years, which is critical thinking. And I will not hope to spoil at all what he's going to be saying, but the application of thought to what is going on around us is completely critical. And I think that's come out in the talks we've heard so far, is that people have not stopped at the appropriate moments to think about the things that are happening. I will close here in order to let Eli speak. And then after he has spoken, as I said before, we'll have a question and answer session with Eli, but also bringing Roger back as well. Okay, so Eli the Everyman, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles. Thanks very much. So I just need to tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Eli. I go out as Eli the Everyman, which is basically I'd like to represent the person on the street, and every person. And my surname is no consequence. So I do go out as I talk on various subjects, and I was first introduced to the New World Order in 1997. So I've had a lot of that fear in me since 1997. In 2010, when my son was born, I gave up all my research because I was just done. So I've known about the Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the Rockefellers, the Bilderbergs, all those people for many, many years. And as you can imagine, when I first met Sandy, we had a nice glass of wine together and shot the breeze. So in 2010, I thought, I'm done with this. I need to get on with my life. And I got on with my life. And then when 2020 came along, I heard about this virus in Italy. I think it was March 2020. And I went downstairs to my wife and I said, there's this virus, there's this pandemic going around the world. What's going on? And she said, it's a hoax. And I went, I'll go with that. So when you've been involved in looking at these systems of control that are global, you don't have to really do any research. There comes a tipping point where you just see things and you've connected so many dots that it just rolls out in front of you. So when Kay kindly asked me to do this talk, I said, well, you know, I do have some involvement in the growing community. I turned my garden into a growing community. I ripped up my lawn and I've got my own beds of potatoes and whatever else I try and grow every year. I am an admin for the More Farmers, More Food movement as well, which is it's a tough gig actually. The farmers are very, they're very on the ground, and it's nice to see some farmers here because getting that conversation going between the farmers and, say, the truther community is a real tough gig because they all think we're conspiracy theorists. Which we're not, we're just trying to be there for them and be available for them as they come online and ask questions. So I wanted to talk about the IPCC and also about the monetization of the biosphere. And some of the stuff I say crosses over with Sandy's work. It's not quite as in-depth as Sandy's, and also Roger's as well. So the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a UN organization, and it's basically got all the data that they use for their policies. So everything is done through the IPCC. This slide is to do with the public-private partnership, which Sandy spoke about briefly, and it shows you the system of control that is in place at the moment. And right at the top, you've got the Bank of International Settlement, which is based in Switzerland, which is run by the Octagon Group. And then you've got the central banks, and they are the policy makers. And then you go down to the WEF, Council of Foreign Relations, Club of Rome, Chatham House, and then the Rockefellers. And then below that are the distributors, which is the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the IPCC, the World Bank, WHO, and then you've got the philanthropists, global corporations, and the NGOs. So as you go down, and then you've got the enforcers, and you've got the policy propagandists, and then you've got the subjects, which is us. So you can see it is a top-down system, and the IPCC sits nicely right there. It is, as Sandy explains, there has been a group of people who have been hell-bent on taking over the world for a long, long time. And they have set out this system which they believe is going to work. And I can tell you now, it's not going to work because people are waking up. It is actually about all our sovereignty. Just to let you know, I don't pay my tax. I don't pay my council tax. I don't pay my bills. I've got over 140 fines for Bristol ULEZ. Yeah, because I drive vans. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to give criminals my money. I use Chris Coverdale's protocols, which is it's illegal to give anybody money if they're going to use it for criminal activities. So Chris Coverdale is where I've gone. I'm not paying tax. I'm not giving them any money. The council tax, exactly the same. I'm just not doing it. They're just wasting our money. So there we go. So the UN has several programs running, and one of their tactics is that they change the names continually. They change the different frameworks. And there's just a selection of different things that they do. And they have the Rio Summit, they have the Kyoto agreements, and they're all actually, it's all their story. There's nothing real really going on, Unfortunately, they have the power to enforce it, which is a real shame. Obviously, the Sustainable Development Goals are the big ones, and they're the ones that are really being pushed forward, as Sandy rightly has been saying for a long time now. So the Paris Accord changed its name to the Paris Agreement. And this is really interesting. There's only three things, really, in the Paris Agreement. There's limit global temperature to 1.5 degrees. Review the country's progress. It's actually every 5 years. I got that wrong. And then provide climate finance to help developing countries to meet their targets. There isn't actually a ratified document that everybody's feeding into. It's really bizarre when you look at it. The Paris Agreement is an accord where basically people come up with, or countries come up with different plans on how to meet certain targets. And they just hand it in. So China will go, we're going to do nothing. We're going to build 20. And they go, okay, that's fine. We'll see how you're getting on. In the Western world, it's a lot harder. So the governments in the Western world have got very strict and, they're communistic actually, protocols to meet their own targets. So everybody's meeting their own targets. It's not a well thought out plan at all. And the other part of this bizarre 3-point plan that they've got is provide climate finance to developing countries. And really, that's just money laundering. That's literally the Western world giving the developing countries money through taxation. So they're taking our money and they're giving it to other countries where it's easier to launder the money. So I've just explained this. At the bottom, it says each country does or does not have to achieve their stated goals. Absolutely bizarre. A license to do whatever they want to do to achieve their goals. Nationally determined contributions. What? It's ridiculous. Each country, if they meet the 3 IPCC objectives, they pay less tax. And if they don't hit their targets, they pay more. So it's monetization. It's just monetization. So the aims are the monetization of the biosphere through the introduction of carbon credits. And the model is Canada at the moment. Sandy might be able to tell me otherwise, but Canada is the most advanced place on the planet for using the carbon credit system. And then it's to reduce the world's population through famine. Yeah. We need to say these things. We have to say them. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the things that I've written down here are just, they're kind of, it's meaningless for me because I'm a kind of go local guy. I'm like, everybody should get to know each other. Everybody should grow food in their environment. You know, we should all support each other on a local level. I personally believe that we're going to be a self-organizing organism where there's going to be lots of different cells who will be very, very strong. And if we come together, we come together. But certainly localism seems to me the way forward. So there we go. I'm not even going to read it out. So the propaganda is Al Gore with An Inconvenient Truth, and every single child in America has watched that film. Every single one. The propaganda has been like this high, right across the board. Ooh. So I don't know whether people remember Seven. She was the original Greta Thunberg in 1992 in the Rio summit. And she came out and it was very empathic, very emotional, young lady. The world's going to, collapse because of the adults doing naughty things. And then they rolled out Greta Thunberg. Just as an aside, Greta Thunberg's press and PR girl is Louisa Rothschild. So, I'm just going to throw that in there. There's hundreds of NGOs and government-funded short films and projects that have been aimed at children. So all our children are in total fear that the world is going to end. And it is absolutely shocking. They're all rooted in catastrophism, and the doom cult mentality. And if anybody wants to look at the doom cult narrative, Lucy Wyatt is a really good person that's pretty much all Lucy does, and she's been doing it for a long, long time, and she talks about from Babylon right through with the Babylon banksters and how it weaves its path. So there's catastrophism in Hollywood movies, and there's repetitive media news cycles that just are continually breaking down the world's climate for us, continually, all the time. So, let's have a listen.
You go to the movies these days, you'll hear lots of scary things.
We've never been hit by a storm quite like this. Global warming is the reason for this unprecedented event.
Environmentalism and Hollywood have gone hand in hand. Mark Morano, a journalist who tries to fight the fear-mongering, calls this propaganda from people who want government to control life.
Mr. Vice President, if we don't act now, it's going to be too late.
What you call propaganda, they say we're just informing people.
They're not informing people. They're using science and environmental scares to achieve these political ends that they've been trying to do essentially since the 1960s.
I think we're on the verge of a major climate shift.
Those are the exact words we heard in the 1970s about the global cooling scare. They actually said climatologists are pessimistic that politicians won't act in time in order to prevent the coming climate catastrophe.
At the UN, a movie actor lectures the delegates.
Droughts are intensifying, our oceans are acidifying.
Leonardo DiCaprio is probably the chief celebrity spokesman. He actually famously said one time, "I'll fly all over the world in order to fight global warming." But he didn't quite get the disconnect.
Red, come on! What you got?
The most successful movie ever is this one.
That's right.
Avatar's villain is a mining company.
This little gray rock sells for $20 million a kilo.
To get it, the miners will destroy the indigenous people's land.
Those savages are threatening our whole operation.
The film's director is James Cameron.
He went down with Sigourney Weaver to Brazil to protest hydroelectric dams, which would have brought running water and electricity to hundreds of thousands of people. He then flew back home to Hollywood, where he had mansions, he had private planes. He's living a high-carbon lifestyle, yet he is willing to deny that progress to the poor people.
Flying around the world criticizing greenhouse gases. We asked DiCaprio and Cameron's representatives about their hypocrisy, but they didn't respond. Break the rules. Hollywood tells kids to fight environmental destruction, to get in the way.
There's nothing to stop them from bulldozing from one coast to another. Except for us. You gotta start thinking like an outlaw.
You might call this
Soft-core eco-terrorism porn for children. This was a movie that showed kids going in and ravaging construction sites, all to save endangered species.
We gotta stop this construction once and for all. We're the only ones who care. We're the only ones who know.
At least this is Hollywood. At least we can look at that and say, that's fiction, that's supposed to be fiction.
This isn't supposed to be.
The New York Times climate reporting reads like a Greenpeace newsletter.
The so-called paper of record says climate signals are growing louder and we're running out of time and the worst is yet to come.
A crippling, potentially historic blizzard.
On TV, storms are not just bad, they're historic.
Historic, crippling, and catastrophic.
Historic snow.
Historic
Snow day. And climate change causes so many problems.
CNN actually asked, was this asteroid caused by global warming?
What's coming our way? Is this an effect of perhaps global warming?
There's a blurring between fiction and reality because they have a political agenda.
Sea level worldwide will go up 20 feet. This is what would happen in Florida.
Climate scientists laugh at those claims, but kids don't know that. And today in school,
they watch this over and over. We've had children who had to sit through Al Gore's film 4 times in 4 different classes.
Global warming, or none like it hot.
The kids also watch The Story of Stuff. It explains how radio is made.
The metal was probably mined in South Africa. The petroleum was probably drilled in Iraq.
Story of Stuff has been viewed 40 million times. It says if you buy a radio.
These people paid with the loss of their clean air, with increasing asthma and cancer rates. Kids in the Congo paid with their future.
This is basically telling kids, everything you buy, we're exploiting other people.
I'm sorry, I bought a radio.
Instead of marveling at the technology behind it, they're calling progress for these countries exploitation.
This film was shown at the UN. The little girl watches the news and learns that because of man, her world will fall apart.
Kids are scared. They're very scared. They have pictures of Santa Claus's home melting, and they do this every Christmas.
There may be no alternative but to cancel Christmas.
And no one better tell kids, don't be scared.
No dissent allowed when you're teaching your children about global warming. They're going to be told that there's one view, and the view is that we face a climate danger and that we must act.
So, there we go. As Sandy quite rightly said, they have made the human the enemy of the planet. They've put the human right up front, which is crazy. So I'm just going to go through, I just picked out, I've used American examples because, believe it or not, we are kind of cabal central in the UK. It's really, the system here is very, very set in stone. And in America, there is a lot more freedom. And up until quite recently, the press in America was actually telling the truth, interestingly enough. They've allowed stories to come out over there. And so I'm just going to go through some of these covers. So we have water as the issue. We have water as the issue. We have water as the issue. We have climate change. We've got soil erosion as the issue. We've got heat as the issue. We've got the Americans leaving the planet because it's so bad. We've got a fried egg. Global warming, climbing temperatures, melting glaciers, rising seas all over the earth. We're feeling the heat. Yeah? Cold. Hot. Arctic meltdown. So this polar bear is in danger, and so are you. Here's how global warming is already threatening the planet. Who owns the Arctic? A global warming shrinks the ice to record lows. The global battle for resources heats up. So all these words, this programming, this spelling, these spells. So, the big dry. Oh, it's all really dry now. The heat is on. Why the ozone hole is growing. The Earth's climate is changing. Global climate change over 2 centuries. These are the graphs. This is like my wizard's better than your wizard. You know. The cooling of America. Our sinking planet. With the head of the UN. Photo op with Mr. Antonio Guterres. And some people have cottoned on to this kind of narrative. So in 1973 it was about being cold, and then being cold again. How to survive the coming ice age. You can go on and on. So every single decade there is something new that they're going to hammer us with the fear. And one of the things I do need to say, it's really important that nobody should have any fear in this situation whatsoever, because we have to be sovereign, and if you step out of fear, you step out of the matrix, you step out of the programming. You're not programmed anymore if you don't have fear. And it's very important, especially for the farmers at the moment, if they feel like the authorities are coming down on them, then they're not. They have no authority over you, because nobody has authority over you. No one. Mother Nature, yeah, God, maybe, if you're into that, but another human being, and certainly not a corporation, which is what the government is, has no authority over you. You are a free person. And if you're not free, and if you don't believe you're free, you can't help anybody. You know? It is about getting people to stand up and be sovereign. Catherine McBean has started the Guardians of the Gate project, which is where farmers come together to actually blockade people. And it's really important. There are rapid response groups as well. You know, we do have to get geared up and talk about these things, because, you know, when DEFRA turn up with the police, I mean, you know, even in my business, I've been pulled over, and I've had the Environment Agency, CID, Bristol City Council, DVLA on me, and they didn't get me for anything because I didn't do anything wrong. But, you know, they will come down, and we need to be ready for those meetings. So, as I just said, 40 years of shameless and baseless fear-mongering to siphon off billions of dollars from taxpayers. There's been 41 climate disaster predictions since '67, and it's 41-0 to us. So I'm just going to talk about this briefly, because people, who knows about ClimateGate? Who actually knows about ClimateGate? Okay, yeah. So interestingly enough, ClimateGate was December 2009, and it was 2 weeks before COP15, which was the IPCC's meeting in Copenhagen. And the story broke 2 weeks before. Clearly, it was deliberate. And I'm just going to play a video which tells you all about it.
To anyone skeptical about the science of global warming,
ClimateGate.
ClimateGate.
ClimateGate?
ClimateGate is the biggest scandal ever.
They're just clicking the books.
ClimateGate is the term being used for a handful of emails stolen last month from the influential CRU, the Climatic Research Unit in England. By far the most embarrassing email is from 1999, in which CRU's director, Phil Jones, brags that he's used a trick to hide the decline. Hide the decline meaning hiding studies from tree rings that show the Earth cooling since 1960, when actual temperatures show a trend toward warming. The phrase, hide the decline, is now so infamous it's being spoofed on YouTube. Hide the decline. And the fact that global temperatures have gone down in some years was in other emails, with one scientist lamenting, "We can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it is a travesty that we can't." To many Republicans, ClimateGate proves that global warming is a deception.
And at worst, it's junk science, and it is a part of a massive international scientific fraud.
But if that's true, it's a fraud adopted by most of the world's leading scientists, along with NASA, the UN, the American Medical Association, and the National Academies of Science of 32 countries, including the United States. To most of them, ClimateGate is a sideshow compared to one overwhelming fact.
The last decade is the warmest decade on record.
Michael Mann is the professor who's being lampooned in that YouTube video. Mann says Hide the Decline was never an attempt to deceive. It was the use of real temperatures to show a real trend.
Those who deny the existence of this problem, who don't have the science on their side, have instead engaged in a smear campaign to distract the public, to distract policymakers.
ClimateGate advocates do want political traction. They hope any uncertainty over man-made global warming might change the president's plan to offer CO2 cuts in Copenhagen next week. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Washington.
So you can see the American media were reporting on ClimateGate, but the hands in this room, nobody knows about ClimateGate. It was East Anglia University. It was here that came out, and there was thousands of emails and documents that were hacked. Really interesting. Just quickly, here's another one. Oh, so here we go.
It's a hoax. A total hoax of a hoax. It's an outrageous lie. And they know it.
That was Senator James Inhofe in a Fox News documentary I had a little bit to do with from May of 2007. It was called Global Warming, The Debate Continues. Well, as the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Inhofe has been challenging the so-called settled science of man-made global warming since 2003. So one can imagine a sense of vindication from the senator after details of ClimateGate, in which scientists emailed each other about cooking results, led to a worldwide scandal. And now, breaking news that one of the scientists who wrote several emails at the center of the scandal, Phil Jones, he's director of the University of East Anglia's Climate Research Unit, just announced that he's stepping down, at least temporarily. Now, all this should make for a pretty gloomy climate summit in Copenhagen, which the president will be going to next week, and that's just fine, we assume, with Senator Inhofe, who will be attending the conference with what he calls a truth squad. Now, to find out why he is going, we welcome Senator Inhofe.
So I'm going to stop that there. What I will say, and one of the things that's been really prominent during the pantomime of the last 4 years, is that scientists are paid a lot of money. Yeah, they're paid a lot of money, and their funding gets cut if they don't follow the narrative. You know, it's as simple as that. Huge amounts of money were spent on rolling out COVID, and trillions of dollars is being spent out on this climate hoax, and it is a hoax. It's an absolute hoax. So there we go. Seriously, guys, I really mean it this time. Give me some more money, and the polar bears are going to get toasted. So I can see what's happening, and I know that it's not going to work because there is a truth about people's lives and how they live. And that awakening of people's minds and what they're seeing around them is just growing and growing and growing. I've been to different meetings recently, especially in the Southwest, where just I'm not going to say ordinary people because they're extraordinary people, but just salt of the earth people are actually coming up to me and saying, you know what, I'm not paying my tax anymore. You know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. You know what, I'm not going to do that. And that is really where the power is, because the power is always with the people. It's just that they've told us that it's not. They don't have the power, truly. So there we go, the polar bears. There's a massive increase in polar bears. It's all lies. It's all lies. So, I'm not going to talk about this because Roger talked about this in his graph, which is basically about the CO2. This is, does anybody know Dr. Patrick Moore? Yes. So his website's just been taken down, ecosense.me, which is really interesting. He was the co-founder of Greenpeace, and he's been very, very vocal in terms of CO2 being a giver of life. Because obviously, why do commercial greenhouses have these huge machines that pump carbon dioxide into them? It's because it makes the plants grow more.
A lot of talk now in the United States about this Green New Deal. I don't know if you've had a at that, but what are your thoughts? Is this a good idea, or are we in trouble, or what's the point?
Well, it's a recipe for mass suicide. It's just quite amazing that someone that is in government, actually elected to the government of the United States of America, would propose that we eliminate all fossil fuels in 12 years. This would basically result, if we did it on a global level, it would result in the decimation of the human population from 7-odd billion down to who knows how few people. I mean, it would basically begin a process of cannibalization amongst the human species, because the food could not be delivered to the stores in the middle of the cities anymore. How would this, even just that one point, the point that bothers me the most is if you eliminated fossil fuels, every tree in the world would be cut for fuel. There's no other source of heating and cooking once you eliminate fossil fuels. You can use animal dung if there were any animals left, but the animals would all die too, because, well, first off, they would all get eaten, and any that survived would have to go wild because there'd be nobody left to look after them. I mean, it's the most ridiculous scenario I've ever heard. People recognize when something is preposterous, and I think that's the best word for it. Well, the best word for it is actually mass suicidal. But why would anyone vote for something that was going to result in the death of nearly all humans on Earth?
Strong words. No pressure. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly, I'm going to add something here which I think is really important, and I've said this in the farmers group, and people might or might not know about this. So in communist China in 1958, Mao introduced the 4 Pest campaign. Do people know about this? Who knows about this? Yeah, it's good. It's really good that you know about this. So what it was is there was disease-carrying animals. Funny, isn't it? And that's exactly what's happening now with avian flu and all the other things they're going to roll out. So it was rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. And the killing of the sparrows led to an explosion in the population of the locusts. And it was a mass famine. This is what they're trying to do. They do want mass famine, and it's not going to happen because we're going to start growing our own food and we're going to start supporting the farmers. And that's what we need to do. You know, really and truly, it does start with the farmers saying no and not letting DEFRA come and, you know, have a go at them. You know, the farmers do have to be very, very strong because they're coming after the farmers big time. So the four pest campaign, between 15 million and 45 million people died. You know, so these are just images that I found of the propaganda that they were using. They put out posters of people killing the sparrows and the rats and the mosquitoes, and they used to. I mean, whether this is true or not, I don't know. But certainly, villagers were told to go and round up. They were taught how to trap sparrows, and as you can see there, it's just all propaganda. And there's a kid with loads of sparrows. So it's communism. Communism is here. We live in a communist state, basically. We're in a transitionary period, and unless we push back and say no, you know, some of these things are going to come in. So Roger explained this in a lot more detail than I, but in terms of the farmers, I don't know what you think about this, Roger, but you know, somebody in the group the other day came on and said, I've just given away 15 of my cows to DEFRA. DEFRA have told me that they've got disease, and he only had 45 cows. And I've lived with this kind of narrative for a long time, and I'm kind of done with it. And I just said, why did you do that? Why? Why did you give over a third of your livestock? Because he thought that was the right thing to do, and he believed in the authority of DEFRA. You see, these agencies are not working on our behalf at all, none of them. So I don't know what Roger thinks, but just say no, get an independent test. You know, I don't know. It's not my subject, but that's, you know, as Roger said, the PCR test was not designed for testing. You know, it produces false negatives almost every time. And as Roger said, Carrie Mullins is the guy to research. So I'm going to leave it there, except for what I'd like to do is play this video, and this explains the system of control that's coming into play.
The presentation I'm going to give you is a very objective one. We need to recognize that many people who are supporting the Paris Accords, if you ask them, why should we have been in this, give me one benefit, no one can really give any benefit. In fact, I haven't had anyone rationally explain even one benefit. What I'm going to explain to you very quickly here, so everyone can understand in very simple ways, is why it was important that Donald Trump got out of this, why it was essentially going to support an international collusion to basically support the polluting of our environment, and more importantly, to basically tax all of us, businesses, small businesses, big businesses, primarily a lot of small businesses, and every consumer here with a carbon tax. And it's a very simple exposition of this, and I hope I make it clear to you. And obviously if you have questions, we're periscoping, you're welcome to join us. First of all, let me explain something very basic here. So in this circle, let's consider the fact that we have a lot of businesses here. These are businesses throughout the world. And these businesses, are producing different things. And let's assume these are typically manufacturing businesses. They take resources, raw materials, they process stuff, and out comes products from these businesses, which typically go to the consumer. A lot of consumers here. This is, you and me over here. And we buy these products and we pay this company some dollar amount. Now, many of these companies, because of the manufacturing process, do put out carbon and CO2 into the environment. Let's call that broadly, pollution, okay? Pollution, the term of CO2, all right? So these are these greenhouse gases that they emit into the atmosphere. This is, let's call it before the Paris Accords. This is what's taking place. Again, businesses take resources, they create products, we buy them, and we pay some fee for them, and these businesses have been polluting. Now, has anything changed post the Paris Accords? And let's use the date 2030, as this is supposed to be an important date for the Paris Accords. So what happens here? Here again, I'm going to draw the same circle. We have the businesses, and let's put the year now 2030. And what occurs in 2030? These businesses still exist, let's say. Again, these are the businesses. And they are creating products, as I mentioned before, to us as consumers. Same situation. This is again you and me. And these consumers pay some fee for these products. And guess what? They're still polluting. And I'll give you some numbers on this. In fact, they're polluting a lot more, as we'll see. But something very interesting happens. For the pollution they do, they have to now pay an organization, which I'm going to call, in double quotes, the IPCC. And this group is composed of people like Al Gore, people like the Bushes, many people from the commodities market, and essentially a global elite in here of quote-unquote scientists. A dollar goes here, dollars go in, and these people deliver these people something called carbon credits. And what this allows these companies to do now is to pollute, but in order to pollute, they have to pay this organization a fee, and this organization issues carbon credits. In fact, it gets even more interesting. These carbon credits, if you look at the commodities market, the global commodities market, these carbon credits are bought and sold here on this commodities market to people. And this generates the ability for this group to generate trillions, not billions, let me explain, trillions of dollars in new source of wealth. So these carbon credits were created by this group as a vehicle to essentially charge polluters something, and this group has the potential to make trillions and trillions of dollars. So how did this all happen, and what was the Paris Accords? Well, the front end for this entire organization, by the way, Al Gore substantially, at a certain point, monopolized and had access to a large number of carbon credits, which he had accumulated, and his goal was to have a payday by forcing these businesses in the future, around post-2030, to buy these carbon credits. And if you actually look at this, the IPCC's PR, I call it their PR machine, was what we call the Paris Accords. The Paris Accords was really their PR engine to get this out as though everyone needed to get on board. And what the U.S., if you look at the United States here, with the flag here, the U.S. Was being forced by the IPCC. By the way, this included establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans, who were essentially telling the U.S. government that it needed to create what we call a green fund. And this green fund, and I'll explain what this was really about, the U.S. was going to have to put $100 billion into this green fund. And what was this $100 billion for? Well, remember, the countries who are polluting really didn't want to be part of this. They didn't really want to be part of the Paris Accords. Why? Because they have to pay fees to the IPCC. So how do you get them to be part of this? So if I do this over here, what I call the influencers of these countries, influencers of countries. So for example, if you take India, China, and you go down the list of what they call about 190 plus countries, remember, all these people have influencers, so-called advisors. This $100 billion number was going to be funneled through different NGOs to essentially pay off, and in fact, people have already gotten agreements that if they join the Paris Accords, that they're going to get dollars funneled to them. This is why people were involved in this. In fact, some of the WikiLeaks stuff came out. Jairam Ramesh, one of the key advisors in India, originally, if you go look at it, he said that the glaciers were not receding, and later on it was stated that the glaciers were receding. And in a recent email on WikiLeaks, he was actually thanking John Podesta for making all of this occur. So you have to really start thinking about what took place. But fundamentally, Trump wanted to exit this because I think Trump realized what was really going on. And what was really going on is this. The mafia of the IPCC was using the United States instrument, our Congress, our tax dollars, to funnel about $100 billion here, so we would pay off these people to join the Paris Accords. Now, let me just tell you, $100 billion is a relatively small amount because these guys were going to make trillions. So let me follow this through again so you get it. Businesses today are polluting. Just to give you an example, China today pollutes around 11 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. 11 billion tons of carbon. That's what they're doing today. By 2030, between now and 2030, guess what? China's still allowed to pollute. In fact, China is allowed to go up to 22 billion tons, which means they're allowed to go 11 billion tons in carbon, which means they're going to pollute more. They're going to double their pollution during this period. No penalties. And that's how they got China to join. After 2030, there's going to be a big payday for these guys because they're going to be able to sell China carbon credits. I hope everyone's following. The bottom line is, these set of 190, in many ways, so-called influencers and advisors, many of them essentially are waiting for this $100 billion payday, supported the Paris Accords because they're going to be paid, and that's how they force their countries' prime ministers and people to say, yeah, we got to join this Paris Accords. The reality is, when you step back and look at this diagram, who really profits is the outlets who are going to make money on carbon credits as they fluctuate and rapidly grow in price post-2030. So a $100 billion payout to most of these corrupt officials is very well worth it for them because they're going to have a 100 to 1,000% increase in profits. So fundamentally, what Donald Trump did was he saw the scam, which is what it is. And fundamentally what this does is makes liberal bourgeois feel good that they're part of the Paris Accords. In fact, the MIT president has said, we have conclusive evidence that temperature has gone up. Let me just make it very clear that Hansen, the guy who came up with this temperature rating at NASA, during the 1950s to 1990, they used what they said was the average temperature, 1998. During that period, that's how they measured the average temperature. And they said the average temperature was 15 degrees Celsius. And they predicted in around 1988 that temperature was going to go up. So again, in 1988, papers are starting to come out saying the average temperature measured between 1950 to 1980 is 15 degrees, and they're saying, temperature is going to rise on the planet Earth. Well, what happens? By 1995, 1996, they find out the temperature actually, in fact, gone down a little bit. It was not going up. And somehow, mysteriously, around 2002, Hansen says, yes, the temperature has gone up. And how did he get it to go up? He got it to go up by saying that the average temperature is now 14 degrees. He actually changed the goalpost. Before it was 15, he said now it's 14, and he said we're measuring 14.64. So what they did was a complete lie, and in fact this changing of the goalpost was done in an email. All of this is written in a beautiful article by Arvind Kumar in American Thinker called 14 is the new 15, or 14 is the new 15, exactly. So you should go read it by Arvind Kumar in American Thinker. He lays it out very beautifully. But the bottom line is, there is no conclusive evidence that the temperature has gone up if you look at the facts. This entire process really profits this group. The reality is China is going to continue to pollute 2x, 200% more. India also gets to pollute from 2 billion to 4 billion. In fact, we're going to drop our carbon emissions from 5 billion to 4 billion. So this entire process is really a big racket. So all of us, when I go back to this as a consumer, guess what? In the future, we're actually going to pay more for products. Businesses are going to be charged more. So businesses are paying taxes. Each consumer's product is going to go up. These guys up here are the ones who are going to make money. So extremely good that Donald Trump pulled out of this. This was a patriotic thing to do. And we need to start really exposing the mainstream media and the elite academics who are all actually behind this. Thank you.
So there we go. So there we go. I hope I've given you some information. Obviously do your own research, take what you want, discard the rest. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
Terrific, Eli. Yeah. A phenomenal amount of really, really valuable information, and exactly giving us the ability to plot the way in which the perception has been set out and continues to be set out. Now, we have gone a bit over on time, but it is an opportunity now, just for a few minutes. We'll have to condense it, I'm afraid, because it's going to be lunch and then otherwise everything gets constituted. But if there are questions for either Eli or Roger, please submit.
I think you're probably going to have to shop around because obviously it boils down to the interpretation of PCR and what tests they're going to do. So you're going to have to find, see if we can find out what independent labs around are, what tests they're using, and do they understand the concepts of CT cycling in terms of how many cycles are significant, and also are they aware of what's the false positive. So, yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think it's a question we just have to shop around and find out who is doing independent tests. And I know, John, you do independent tests for some of your milk testing. Would they do other stuff as well?
I'm not aware they do.
No, okay.
I think also the question was about independent tests on livestock. And I just think from what Roger had said, maybe in the first instance, just to go back to APHA or DEFRA or VMD and question, as he did, their understanding of PCR or any of the testing in the first instance. Because if they can't demonstrate to you that they know how to use the tests that they're using and that they can't demonstrate that they are in fact diagnostic tests, then I think you're on stronger ground. Okay.
Can I just say, just a quick one. There is a campaign called Inspect the Inspectors. Okay. Which says exactly what that does. So it's, if they turn up, you audit them, which is a sovereign statement, right?
Yeah, that is such a good point, I think. Such a strong point.
Yeah.
Hi, Tracy Elizabeth. I asked a local vet about the PCR test on the bird flu, and he said it's not the only test they do. They do more and longer tests. So, yeah. But I will say neither. And the other thing I was wondering is, when I challenged local councillors, they say, oh, well, the information about CO2 was proved by the oil industry themselves. They've said this for years. And it's like, how can I challenge them on that? The oil industry has said that we're going to cause climate change. So it's them that seeded all of this. So anybody got an answer to that? What do I say to the councillor?
I'll be honest with you, I'm very much creating a parallel society. That's my standpoint, actually, and to just disengage with those establishments. Havel did it in Czechoslovakia. As soon as communism came in there, he knew there were going to be people like us who were going to just be in the natural way of living as opposed to having a massive overlay. And he knew that it would only be a matter of time before those people would all get together and form a new society. And I believe we do have to push back, but actually in terms of butting up against the system, they're just going to run their programs, I'm afraid. I have been in events where there has been councillors, and it's great to get councillors on board because there is a movement now, and if you can get through to a councillor one-to-one and talk to them, that's much more powerful. Getting councillors and MPs to come and people in power to come to these sorts of events is really important. It's difficult, but it is really important because there are really good people working in a bad system. You see, that's the key thing, I feel. So, yeah.
I think it's also important to recognise that the oil industry are also setting themselves up to then make money from whatever they call alternative energy as well. You know, Rockefeller, he was an oil industry, and that's where he made his money, his oil industry, oil. So, of course, the oil industry are going to buy into whatever narrative is ultimately going to allow them to make more money and keep going in the future. So, but they also recognise that they can't get rid of fossil fuels as well. So they're being a bit disingenuous. They're just trying to do a PR stunt by saying things like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think specifically it's entirely in their interest, both to, exactly like Roger says, to cover both outcomes, but also to create the idea that it is scarce and dangerous, and therefore people have to pay a premium regardless. So whether that's through the form of carbon credits or whatever it is, it's entirely in their interest to say, what we're doing is critical, but it's really dangerous and there are consequences, and you have to pay the consequences. This is how this whole environmental circle works. There's a question back there. Sorry, yeah, while we're back.
I've actually got an answer to that previous question. I read the Smooth Zero by 2050 report that was mentioned earlier, and I went to my local council, and I took extracts, and they all were like thinking I was promoting it, so it's so brainwashed. But in this report, which was funded by the UK government in 2019, to explain how we can get from here to absolute zero by 2050, they say two things in the beginning. One is, this is all based on good climate science and international treaties and popular opinion. It's the school children rioting. Well, we already know that it's the government that creates the national curriculum that's telling the children that there's global warming and that's why they're protesting. But when they talk about international agreements that we're legally bound to do this, what they don't mention the international agreements from 50 years ago, which is the Environmental Modification Treaty, which is 50 years ago, governments were so concerned about the effect of geoengineering and climate change technologies that they actually came together and they signed an agreement that it would be used for warfare. And it didn't mean that it stopped, it just was kind of some agreement we're not going to use it deliberately to bit drag the ground in the next country. It didn't stop because there was no treaty in 2010. So I understand that the good climate science, to me, science is a method of inquiry. You don't trust the science. It should be rigorous debate. And anything that says, oh, it's all because of the good climate science, well, actually, no, you shouldn't have to say that if it's properly followed the scientific method. And going back to Dr. Carrie Mullis, he also said, he analysed a study that said, temperatures rising, and that was an average of the nighttime and the daytime temperatures. And the reason that the temperature appeared to rise was because it was in an urban environment. So the nighttime temperatures increased, the daytime temperatures stayed the same, but added together it looked like global warming. So he busted that in that way. But I just say, yeah, governments have been manipulating the weather for a century, we can say for definite 50 years, And they're not talking about those international agreements, they're only talking about the international agreements like the climate, the COP and the Paris Accord. So for me, what I say to people is, the gas I'm concerned about is not greenhouse gas, it's gaslighting.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you have any response, any comment to that? That's a point very well made. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I would say spot on. You know, it is exactly that. There is, you know, as I said in my talk, there is no such thing as a greenhouse gas from the radiation. It's all to do with convection, and that's what we need to undermine. Is actually what does control our planetary temperature, because then they've got no leg to stand on. They can produce whatever figures they like, but if we can get through the message that there's no greenhouse effect in the way that they describe it that determines our global temperature, then everything that they want to do based on that is foundless.
Right, I'm afraid we are out of time for questions now. There might be a chance to ask some more a little bit later on today, but obviously with lunch coming up, you can find either of these guys or indeed Sandy and track them down to ask your particular questions. Just on this, in terms of who informs who, perhaps I should just leave you with what I heard from the horse's mouth, in that the government receives advice from the Climate Change Committee, and the previous chair was the former MP John Gunn and now Lord Deben, who I interviewed, and I asked him exactly what Roger put forward, which is how is it that you explain 3% of something has more of an effect than 97% of it, in that if you're saying that anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions account for 3% of the global total, how does that on its own affect the temperature either up or down? And his answer was that 97% of scientists say that that's So I asked him again, and he said the same thing again. And then I asked him again, and the bloody Zoom call ended and we got cut off.